Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Robertson Wesley Kids Church with Reverend Karen Bridges. Another exciting day. It's beautiful outside. I hope you're getting out there to enjoy it here in Edmonton, Alberta. Hopefully it's nice wherever you are. If you are joining us today on live Facebook, I always love to see who is joining me. So if you want to send me a message or add in some emoticons as we discuss things, that would be great. This week, we have been exploring one of the superheroes of the Bible. The superhero we've been talking about is Moses. So on Monday, we started with the origin story of how Moses came to be. And it was rather a nasty little struggle that he had, facing death at the beginning, and then his mother and his sisters saved him through the Pharaoh. Hey, Sebastian and Sienna. Nice to see you. So we're talking about Moses. Moses is one of the first main characters of the Bible who really helped the people realize that they were chosen by God, and God saved them. And so the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, and the Pharaoh was rather mean. So yesterday we heard a little bit about how as Moses grew up and was saved by the Pharaoh's daughter, of all people, he realized that the people, his people, the culture that he came from, were not being treated well. They were slaves to the Pharaoh. And Moses didn't like this. So Moses was, already at a very young age, a person who stood up for other people and tried to make a difference in the world and make it a better place where everyone was treated equally. And so we made a little basket for baby Moses in the beginning. Yesterday we talked about how God then spoke to Moses in the burning bush. And when God spoke to Moses, God told Moses that I want you to free my people. Now, what I didn't tell you yesterday was the fact that Moses tried to get out of this. So God basically said, hey, Moses, here's your job. You need to go in, go back to Egypt, and I want you to tell the Pharaoh, your stepdad, tell the Pharaoh that you have to release all of the slaves. And so Moses was just like, you know what, God, I don't think I'm the right person for this. I don't think this is something that I'm capable of doing. So Moses had a lot of doubts. And sometimes that's what's happening to all of us. We've all been given special gifts from God, and sometimes we don't believe it. We don't believe that we're just ordinary people. How is it that we can make a difference in this world? And so Moses was like that. So Moses said to God, first of all, tell me what am I going to say when people ask who sent me to do this? And God responded by saying, well, tell them that I am sent you. I am is one of the names for God. Can you think of any other names for God that we use? We don't typically say, dear I am. We usually say, dear God, or dear Creator. God is pretty amazing and is above gender. Sometimes we refer to God as Father, but we can also refer to God as Mother, as Parent, as Creator, as Spirit. We could talk about how God is divine, powerful, compassionate, loving. Can you think of any other names for God? Descriptors? At any rate, in this particular story, God told Moses that God's name was I am. Tell Pharaoh that the great I am has sent you. And Moses said, yeah, okay, that's all good, that's all fine, but what happens if the people don't believe that I was sent by you? And so here's what God did. God said to Moses, take that staff that's in your hand. So imagine kind of like a shepherd's crook, like a really tall stick. I want you to take that stick and I want you to throw it onto the ground. So Moses took the stick and threw it onto the ground. And when Moses looked down, he saw that it was and had become a snake, which made Moses go, yee! And Moses actually backed away and wasn't really sure. And God said, now pick it up again. Moses like, I'm not sure about that, but slowly, probably picked it up and held it far, far away, and suddenly it became a staff again. Whew. So God said to Moses, if they don't believe you, do that and see if they'll believe you, that God sent you. Maybe they'll realize it's God who has the power that was able to turn your staff into a snake and back to a staff. Moses like, yeah, okay, yeah, I can definitely do that. God said, well, if they don't believe that, we can do something else. Moses is like, all right, I'm listening. God said, I want you to take your hands and I want you to place them in the pockets of your coat or cloak, because they used to wear long cloaks. So Moses took his hands, stuck them in his cloak, and when he pulled them out, they were all diseased. They looked like leprosy. They were white as snow, and it's kind of flaky and nasty looking. And Moses was like, oh, this isn't good. I don't know if I like this. And God said, now Moses, put your hands back in your pockets. So Moses did. And when Moses pulled them out, they were all healed again. Whew. All right, so we got two things that we can do. First, we can show them the stick trick, the staff trick, staff to snake, back to staff. We could show them almost like a magic trick. Take your hands, stick them in your cloak. They come out diseased. You put them back in. They come out healed. Woo, amazing. And then God said, now, if that doesn't convince them, there's a third thing we can do. I want you to go to the Nile River. So remember, the river Nile actually runs through all of Egypt. So once Moses was back, he said, I want you to go to the river, grab a pail of that water, and I want you to take that water and throw it onto the ground. And when it hits the ground, that water is going to turn into, it's really gory, it's going to turn into blood. That will be my last sign for the people. Now, hopefully, by then, they will actually believe that you have been sent by me. So that's some pretty good power and reasons for why Moses could probably do this. But Moses still had doubts. Can you imagine? So God says, hey, you go do this. I'm going to show people that I actually sent you by doing all of these amazing things. And Moses still wasn't convinced that he was the right person to do this. Moses actually pleaded with God and said, please, God, could you just send someone else? I'm not a good speaker. I'm not good at telling people what to do. I don't like talking to crowds, kind of like me. I don't like talking on the phone. But sometimes God has different plans for us. So Moses pleads with God, please, 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 don't make me do this. Don't make me do this. I can't speak very well. In fact, as I mentioned yesterday, he had a bit of a stutter. So you can imagine when you get really nervous, the stutter gets worse. And so he's imagining himself standing in front of his really nasty stepfather or the new Pharaoh and not being able to speak. And God said, all right, I hear ya. You got a brother. His name's Aaron. And Aaron's a pretty good speaker. Now, as I told you before, I'm going to be there and I'm going to put the words in your mouth. So you don't need to worry about what you need to say. I'm going to tell you what to say. Moses is still like, oh, I don't think that's enough. All right, fine. Take your brother Aaron with you and Aaron can speak for you. I'll give all the words to you to give to Aaron, but Aaron will speak for you. And Moses was still like, okay, fine. Okay, fine, God, I will do this. So he had to make the trip all the way back to Egypt, which was a long way. So he trekked off with his wife, Sephora, and they went back to Egypt. When they got back to Egypt, he brought his brother with him and Miriam as well. There's a whole bunch of them. And I think that the reason Moses did this was because still in his heart of hearts, he didn't like the way his people were being treated, his relatives, his extended family. It would be like if all of the Canadians weren't being treated well. And there's many examples of different groups of people in the world not being treated well. So he did it. He went back, he spoke to the Pharaoh and said, Pharaoh, you need to let my people go. And so yesterday we talked about some of the plagues. So Moses says this, Moses convinces the people, but the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, still doesn't want to do it. And so God performs a bunch of other things, sends plagues. These plagues are nasty things that are sent down to make it really challenging for people, to make us really uncomfortable. And so the first plague, and I would like to challenge all of you to think about food that could represent each of these plagues. Food that you could eat so that you will remember what the 10 plagues were that the Egyptian people faced, not the Israelites. So this didn't happen to the Israelites. This happened to the Egyptians, who were the ones who were in charge, not the ones who were doing all the work. And remember, all of the Israelites were making bricks out of straw and mud in order to make the great pyramids that we see. So, first plague, God told Moses the first plague was that the water that was running through Egypt would turn to blood. Can you imagine going to have a drink of water and suddenly it looks like blood? Ah, yuck. So that was the first plague. And at first the Pharaoh was like, that's not so bad. All right, fine, we're gonna make it more exciting. So then God sent millions and millions of frogs. Millions of frogs. Now, some of us like frogs, and frogs are okay, but when you've got millions of frogs everywhere, can you imagine walking around and slipping or stepping and squishing and ugh, so gross, slimy, awful. So they didn't like that very much, but it wasn't enough to make the Pharaoh release the people. So then God sent gnats. They're like really nasty little insects that are just annoying, just everywhere. That wasn't enough, so then he sent the fleas. Have you ever had fleas? I guess that's lice. Fleas are what dogs can pick up. They're also very nasty. Flies are horrible. So think about that. Lice, flies, and fleas. And then that wasn't enough. So God thought, okay, fine, I'm going to make it harder for you to eat. And so God actually made all of the livestock, the cows and the goats and everything else, and the chickens were all suddenly diseased, so they couldn't drink the milk or eat the food. That wasn't enough, so God sent down boils. So all the Egyptian people started to get sores on their arms, like little bubbles, like blister kind of things, really gross. That wasn't enough, so then the thunder and the lightning came and the rains poured everywhere. And then after that, they sent locusts. So think of like kind of grasshopper-y things everywhere. Can you imagine the sound? Oh, it would be awful. And, oh, right. It would be awful. If you haven't made your kazoo, you can do that from yesterday. And then the darkness came. And so the light didn't come up. And you know how hard it is when it's just always dark. It's just depressing. Very sad. Very hard to do anything, especially when you don't have electricity. And then last but not least, God got back at Pharaoh for what Pharaoh had done or tried to do to Moses. In the beginning, remember, Pharaoh was worried that there would be too many of the Hebrew people, of the Israelites, and they would overpower the Egyptians. And so the Pharaoh's way of making sure this didn't happen was to kill off the firstborn boys. So God returned the favor at this point. God was kind of revengeful back in the Old Testament. And said that they would kill the firstborn Egyptian boys. It was after that point that the Pharaoh finally gave in and gave up and said, fine, I will free the people. So this is the point where we're at. We are at Exodus, which is the second book in the Bible. So we have Genesis followed by Exodus. And Exodus is the book of Moses. Kind of like the Gospels are the stories of Jesus. Exodus is the story of Moses. And we're going to go to chapter 14. This is a pretty big thing. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and camp in front of this place by the sea. You shall camp opposite it by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are wandering aimlessly in the land, the wilderness has closed in on them. I will harden Pharaoh's heart and he will pursue them so that I will gain glory for myself over Pharaoh and all his army. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So then the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled. The minds of Pharaoh and his officials were changed towards the people, and they said, what have we done, letting Israel leave our services? So this is the moment where the Pharaoh realized, okay, I set them free because I wanted all of those plagues to disappear, but oh no, who's going to do all the work now because they're all leaving? Ah! So he was freaking out. So he had a chariot made ready. So he got his chariot ready, he got the horses hooked up to the chariots. Those are those wagons with 3 wheels. And they started to go after the Israelite people. So a whole bunch of Egyptians and the officers in the army started chasing after them. So then, as they were getting closer, Moses was commanded by God to take his staff. Remember the staff that he could turn into a snake and back into a staff? He took the staff up to the Red Sea, and he was supposed to place or kind of slam down his stick. And you know what happened? The water of this big sea divided. The river divided. The water divided. And so all of the Israelites, the people who had fled from slavery, were able to walk through the water without getting wet. They actually, because sometimes if you go into a really fast river, you could get swept away. But with the water parted, because of God's power, the Israelites were able to actually cross the sea to the other side. And once they got to the other side, and they were all free and clear, the waters whoosh, came back in. And some of the Egyptians who had followed were suddenly swallowed up by the water. And so the Israelites were safe on the other side of the stream. And so that is how Moses freed the people. And it was a very scary time. But yes, they do get to the other side. And at this point, there's some celebrations. Moses is pretty excited. Miriam is quite the singer, his sister, and she loves to use tambourine, dance around. And so the people were thrilled that they finally were freed. But people are kind of funny, because now they were like, now what? Now what do we do? We don't know what to do. We've always just made bricks, and we've lived in Egypt our whole lives. And what's next? We have no homes. We have no food. What are we going to do? And they were told that they were going to walk to the promised land. So God had committed to them that they would get to the promised land and their lives would be beautiful. It's filled with milk and honey. So think of the most beautiful place, this promised land. It's almost like a heaven on earth, a place where you would have everything you needed, and God would make sure that you had everything you needed. But first, you got to walk through the wilderness, through the desert for 40 years. Can you imagine 40 years of walking just to get to the promised land? I mean, think about how old you are now. Add 40 years onto that. You'd be ancient by the time you got there. You wouldn't be able to enjoy it like you would right now. And you know that back then, they had to walk. They had to walk a long, long way. So if we think it's hard just staying at home right now, can you imagine what it would have been like if you had been freed from slavery and then sent out into the wilderness where you'd never been before, with very little supplies? It's very similar to what a lot of people who are refugees experience, where suddenly their homes are taken away and they're put in camps. Very, very similar. The people had camps as they went along, and they knew, though, that they had God with them. And that's something we all need to trust as well, is that God is with us right now, always with us. So really today what I wanted to talk about was how Moses, who was the chosen one of God to lead God's chosen people out of slavery into freedom, had doubts. And sometimes we have doubts about our faith. Maybe we aren't sure if we believe that God really existed. But we're given a couple of pretty amazing examples in this story today about how God was there and how God in this time in the beginning would prove to people that God was there. God has proven to us as Christians later on in the Bible because God sent Jesus on earth. So back in Moses' time, Jesus wasn't even born yet. Jesus wasn't even conceived yet. The relationship was between the people and God. And so they had a lot of prophets and other people that spoke words of God to the people. And they believed that they had to go through a priest in order to talk with God. And it's later on, once Jesus comes, that we realize that God was here on earth and that we have a direct line or a direct connection to God. We don't need to go through Moses to hear God's word. We all have access because of what Jesus did. And even after Jesus died and was resurrected, we know that the Spirit of God is all around us. And this particular Sunday is Pentecost Sunday, where we are going to hear about how the Holy Spirit came upon the people and how the church was suddenly created. The church as we know it was created. And so we honor that on Pentecost Sunday, which is this Sunday coming up. And so I would encourage you all over the next few days to really decorate. I want you to, if you can, find streamers of all different colors. It's kind of like, you know, at Easter we prepared for Jesus' resurrection, but now we want to celebrate that the church exists. So let's have a party for our church. So even though we can't physically be in our space, the most important part is that the church is wherever the people of God are. It doesn't matter if they were in Egypt or in the Promised Land or on their way to the Promised Land. The church is wherever the people are. And so we need to celebrate. So I would encourage you for Sunday. Sunday we're going to have communion. You could make cupcakes, you could make cake, you could create streamers. Maybe you could have like a fruit salad with all the different colors showing how our spirit comes together. Maybe you might want to whip something up to kind of give that sense of cloud or air or lightness. The Spirit is sometimes described as wind or fire. So yeah, think about what you're going to do. Maybe put up some balloons in your house to celebrate the birth of the Christian church, because that's what we're going to do on Sunday. And like I said, prepare yourselves for communion. We will also have a bit of a celebration with Kids Church on Sunday morning. So starting next week in June, we are going to move to having Kids Church once a week on Wednesdays at 11. And then again on Sunday, we'll have kids worship service. So that's for June. And then in July, I'm going to provide a vacation Bible school once a week. And so I will give you more information about that soon. So I'm really glad you all joined us today, and I'm glad you're hearing and learning the story of Moses, one of our superheroes from the Bible. We've heard about the origin, the call, the doubts, and there's a bit more to the story, which we might hear more about next week. I'm so glad you joined me, and I hope you have a really good day. Get out into that sun and enjoy every minute of it. Just take in the beauty of all of creation that God has created. And be glad that we are not enslaved, but that we are God's people, and that God is caring for us and walking with us no matter where we are or how we do that. So remember, friends, that you are not alone because God loves you. Miss you all, and I look forward to seeing you eventually. And until then, it's really nice to see you online. So thanks again for joining. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.